Book 3, Part 5. I walked to the rug near the fire, plopped down, and stared into it, not feeling the tears that fell. I had pulled him into this somehow. I was sure of it. He was an unwilling victim. If I couldn't make him want me, then I would find a way to break the bond and free him. I must be a monster, I whispered into the flames, because I was suddenly even more determined for the first option. Then I buried my head in my hands and cried. No one came to comfort me. Track didn't even come to rib me about the list, and Phil didn't come back. I simply cried until the tears were gone. Then I squared my shoulders, stood, and nodded. I'll do whatever it takes to make him happy. I have somehow bound him to me, and I will make sure he never regrets it. Somehow that sounded so noble and sincere in my mind. I ignored the tug in my heart that said he should want it on his own. I smashed into silence, set on my own path now. I grabbed the toothbrush and washcloth and marched through the empty room into the kitchen. There was a pump and a bucket, and I filled it, first washing my face, and then, realizing no one was coming, I quickly undressed, gave myself a cold sponge bath, and redressed. I thought about washing my hair, but there wasn't enough water, and I wasn't sure where to dump it if I did. So I ran a brush through my hair, then pulled my other shirts out, and did something I wasn't sure why I remembered how to do. Back in the room, I lifted up the mattress, rested it on the back of my shoulder, and laid some shirts out, pressing them as flat as I could. Then I lowered the mattress and gave a nod as I straightened the bedding. Finally, knowing they were all out there waiting, I put on my brave face and went to the front door. I barely got the handle turned when it stopped. I frowned and tried again. It was locked. I tried again. Nothing. Seriously? They locked me in here? I growled, suddenly ticked. Ray, stop, came Track's voice from the other side. I looked up. Why am I locked in here? It's still daylight out, he chuckled. Oh. Then my eyes widened. Oh, I gasped, quickly stepping away from the door, as if the light could burn me by being too close. Go back into the other room and shut the door, then I'll come in. Okay, I stated, turned and hurried back into the bedroom. When I called out, I heard the front door click and then open. It closed, and then he opened the bedroom door. Are you suicidal or something? He huffed, but was smiling. No, I snorted. I just forgot, I shrugged. He frowned, serious again. You forgot it was daylight out, or you forgot that the daylight will kill you? I bit my lower lip, and he mumbled something under his breath. Ray, I don't know why there are holes in here, I stated, poking myself in the forehead. I just wasn't thinking. I didn't know if I was more annoyed or scared. Did I really forget about the sunlight's effect? Or did I just forget the time of day? I couldn't remember. Track stepped up to me then, his eyes soft but worried. Ray, while you have these holes, he shrugged, since he couldn't think of a better word for it either, you have got to be careful. I nodded, lowering my head. He took my hands, and the feel of him comforted me. Not only Pack, he was my best friend in the whole world. I stepped forward and he wrapped his arms around me. I didn't cry as he held me. I just let the comfort soak into me and pushed the fear out. "What are we going to do with you, wolf girl?" he whispered, stroking my hair. "You could go into town and pick up a few things for me," I chuckled. He moaned. "I saw what you wrote on that list." When I stepped back, I nodded. "You're my best friend, Track. I can't ask the others to do it." Then my face tightened. "And you can't tell them either." Suddenly, my mission sprang back and my smile reappeared. "And you better not let them see any of it." I pulled the wadded paper out of my pocket and he moaned again. "Where's that pencil?" I found it and sat back down. The last few minutes quickly and oddly forgotten as I scribbled more things. He looked over my shoulder and growled, "You know, you really are pushing this best friend thing." But what I heard was, "I hate this, but I'll do it." So I kept writing. "Okay, that's enough," he growled, snatching the paper away and looking at it. I chewed on my lip while he read it, then flinched when he shot me a hard look. "What's this about, Ray?" "None of your business," I stated with a whine. He sighed, nearly rammed the paper into his pocket, mumbled something about females, and stormed out. "Stay inside this time," he snapped. But I smiled as I heard the door closed. This was going to work. I looked over at the other bed and lifted my chin. Get used to being cold. A few minutes later, I heard a knock at the front door. I frowned and walked out. "Hello?" "It's me, Marcus," came a voice. "Can you go in the other room so I could come in?" "Okay," I stated and hurried back, calling out when I had the door closed. I heard the clicks and then he opened the bedroom door. "Those look good on you," I smiled. He was wearing the big boots and the heavy jacket, and it looked rugged in a good way. He smiled back and looked around the room. "The guys are going to town." My smile widened, but I tried to look casual. "Okay." Rock said something about picking up a generator and a TV and a DVD player. He chuckled and I laughed. "It would be nice, but I doubt Ryan will go for it." Marcus nodded and we both stood there for a minute. I didn't know much about him. He was nice and I trusted him completely, but I didn't think we had ever really been alone before. "I brought some cards," he stated, pulling a deck out of his pocket. "They sent you to babysit me." "I offered," he grinned. "Well then, what will it be?" We sat in the main room and played cards for over an hour. He was pretty good, and once I threatened him for going easy on me, he got even better. He kicked my butt 3 games to my 2, and I was set on getting even at least, when there was another knock on the door. Marcus looked at me, and, like a good girl, I went into the other room and shut the door. More clicks and doors, and then he called out to me. When I walked back in, Ryan smiled. "So who's winning?" When I sighed, he laughed. "I see. Well, I'm here to take over, if needed." Chapter 6. He actually joined us, and we were laughing and throwing out competitive threats as another hour passed. I knew Phil hadn't gone to town with them. I could sense him close, but I didn't ask. There was a plan now, and no matter how many games we played, or how much I did enjoy it, the plan was plain in the back of my mind. Finally, Ryan stood. "These woods don't get much light here," he stated, looking at me, "but it's still afternoon, so I want you tied up in here until I say." My playful salute made him chuckle, and then he glanced at Marcus. I'm good, he stated. Then we both looked at the deck of cards. Yeah, enough was enough. Any chance you're letting them pick up that generator? I smiled, also standing. Our alpha's brows rose, but the smile stayed. Not enjoying the great outdoors? You are wolves, he teased. Wolves that are used to cable, I muttered under my breath, and he laughed. Marcus and I chuckled too. Then I gasped and looked down at my legs. No, no, not now, I hissed at them. I had plans, and this would ruin it all. I ignored the talking around me, closed my eyes, and concentrated. As long as I caught it early enough and wasn't under a lot of pressure, I could stop it. Finally, I let out my breath and opened my eyes. Ryan watched me until I gave a nod, and the smile returned. You're getting better at that. Praise from your alpha does something to you. It has its own special tingle, and I beamed like a toddler that just took her first steps. His eyes sparkled. Well, there's no one else to relieve you right now, he said to Marcus. I'm fine, unless she's tired of me. But Phil is here, I stated carefully. Ryan nodded. Yes, he is, but we all have to earn our keep around here, so he's putting in some hard labor. Oh, what can I do? I asked, suddenly concerned that I hadn't done anything to help. Not to worry, you just stay. He saw my head drop and sighed. We'll find something for you to do when the sun is gone. I nodded, and then Marcus gestured to the bedroom. When Ryan left, I plopped in front of the fire. It's funny, from here it does seem like the middle of the night. Marcus sat next to me and nodded. What's it like? I asked, staring into the hearth. Daylight. Oh, well, I've only seen it through windows, I sighed, suddenly sad about that. It's bright. I looked at him and he shrugged, then we both chuckled. If that was the only difference, then I guess I wasn't missing out on much. Just then we heard a hard knock on the front door. Marcus stood and went out into the main room. A minute later, he walked in with a large plate piled with food. He sat back down next to me, offered me some, and then started to eat when I declined. He knew I didn't eat unless I was in wolf form, but was just being polite. Another knock, and I jumped up, offering to get it so he could eat. His brows rose, and I chuckled. Oh, yeah. He put his plate down and went out again. This time, Phil came back with him. I smiled, and then frowned as I looked him over. His hands were brown with dirt. It was smudged across one cheek, and his heavy jacket was covered in pine needles and more dirt. I tilted my head, and he shrugged. This is what hard work looks like out here. It looks good on you, I grinned, and he snickered. No, I mean it. I stepped up to him, inspecting him visually. You look so rugged. Yeah, another one of those things that sounds better in your mind. Well, maybe I should stay like this, he chuckled, but I could feel him watching me. I inhaled slowly, and then Marcus shifted positions out of the corner of my eye. Sorry, I smiled at him and shrugged, but didn't reply. And he shrugged, but didn't reply. Phil looked at the plate of food. She keeping you from eating? He teased. Actually, the door is, Marcus ribbed back. Well, I'm here for a change of clothes. They're letting me call it a day. He walked over to his one bag and started looking through it. When he had what he wanted, he turned. Now, for a quick shower. Unless you really want me to stay this way, he winked. A shower, I gasped. They have a shower? Holes or no holes, I knew I loved a shower. Phil put up one hand. Before you get all excited, Let me clarify that statement. My smile slipped and he nodded. It's got its own building, but other than that, there are 4 stalls, a hose on a clip at the top, and a pump handle. Marcus let out a slow moan and Phil nodded again. I checked it out. It's not for the faint of heart. So, how does the water get heated? I asked slowly, afraid to hear the answer. It doesn't. I gasped again, this time from sheer shock. Yes, Tay, cold water showers, nothing more, he stated in a playful but grim voice. Without realizing it, I wrapped my arms around myself and shivered. Just the thought was unnerving. Phil walked over to me. Don't worry, you won't be taking one of those showers. I smiled. I liked it when he talked like that. He winked. The guys are bringing something back that should help. Oh? Well, I'm hoping they can find something that, he looked around, will work. You should wait then, too, I stated matter-of-factly. I don't want you taking an ice-cold shower either. Phil and Marcus exchanged one of those guy looks, and Phil leaned in and kissed my cheek. Trust me, it will do me good. Marcus coughed to cover his laugh, but Phil chuckled and headed towards the door. Keep her safe, my friend. My head tilted again. He was so confusing. On one hand, he did seem to want me, seemed to care. He even told me he loved me. I glanced at the bed, then sighed. I guess I just don't get men, I whispered. That's okay. You females confuse us just as much. I guess it's only fair, Marcus chuckled. Wow, that was the most playful thing I can remember him saying to me. My head tilted the other way, this time looking at him. He was usually the quiet one, quiet and serious, or at least not as wild as the others. I only meant, I smiled. No, you're right. I just didn't expect that from you. He shrugged. I do have my moments. You better eat your food before it gets cold. We both sat back on the rug and he picked up his plate. Can a cold shower right out of the hose really be good for you? I finally asked. He started to choke on his food. I panicked, jumped up on my knees and pounded on his back. One of his hands waved me off, but he continued until I ran into the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. He did take that and gulped it down. Okay now? I asked, watching his face. His cheeks were bright red and his eyes were watery. Yeah, he replied in a raspy voice. When I frowned, he nodded, still shaking a bit. I took the glass and refilled it. He thanked me when I sat back down, and I shrugged. You have to chew before you swallow, I teased. Once I knew he was okay, I shrugged. I don't need to be pampered, you know. I'm not the soft paw everyone thinks I am. His eyes widened, and I nodded. If a cold shower is good for you, I can take one. Marcus smiled and shook his head. That wasn't really what he meant, and that doesn't make you a soft paw, Reina. I watched him pick up the glass and drink the rest down. My brows knit. But Phil said that a cold shower would be... My eyes widened, and he looked down at his plate. Now I was even more confused. Too confused to even be embarrassed. Again with the mixed signals, saying one thing, and then I glanced over at the bed again. I frowned and picked at the fibers in the rug. What was the problem then? Did he want me or didn't he? I growled softly and tightened my lips. Maybe I needed to confront him, flat out asked him. I flinched then, knowing I wasn't that brave. What if he said he didn't? I bit my lower lip and then sighed. Yeah, I was a chicken. The next time there was a knock, Marcus put down his plate and jumped up quickly, too quickly. I didn't mean to stare at him so hard. I wasn't really. I was just deep in thought. He and Phil walked back in. My wolf, now in clean jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt with the sleeves pushed up. I smiled again and stood. He smelled clean now, but still carried the scent of the woods. I liked that. "Sorry, I think I washed all the rugged off of me," he chuckled. "Not all of it," I grinned. Marcus stood. "Well then, I should probably go and see if they need to abuse my muscles now." "Thanks for babysitting me," I smiled as he headed towards the door, his now empty plate in one hand. "Any time," he stated with a nervous chuckle. "So, what did you two do while I was hard at work earning us another night's lodging?" "Well, we played cards, talked. That's about it. Oh, and I saved him from choking." "Really?" he smiled. I nodded, then shook my head, pursing my lips. It wasn't bad. I wasn't sure if it was bad. I wasn't sure if he was going to make it for a minute. I didn't know why, but suddenly my pulse quickened, and I glanced down at the rug. We were sitting there. He was eating. I tilted my head a little, still looking at the spot. I was talking about taking showers, and suddenly he just... "You were talking to Marcus about taking a shower?" His voice had changed, and he was watching me carefully now. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep a straight face. When I looked up, I kept my eyes innocent and wide. Yes, I was so worried, Phil. His face started to turn an odd color. Okay, so red was a color. So I moved over next to him. I let my words come out slowly, feeling him react to them. I put my hand on his back. "Why were you talking to him about taking a shower?" He wasn't smiling now and seemed almost irritated. For some reason, that made me happy. I used to snarl at girls that played these games, but I suddenly saw a side to them I hadn't before. He was throwing me mixed signals left and right. He told me he loved me. Sometimes his actions confirmed that, but then other times, I needed to know. Since, for whatever reason, I couldn't right out ask him, this was a way to confirm things. I said a few silent apologies to a few females I had thought unkindly of in the past, and then frowned. "Really? I tell you that Marcus nearly choked to death, and you want to talk about taking showers?" I huffed, and his eyes narrowed. "I can tell Marcus is just fine." His words were still tight, and my skin tingled. Why was this feeling so good? I didn't play games with males, not these kinds, but I couldn't seem to stop. He had confused me. He needed a good dose of whatever this was. "Well, he wasn't," I snapped. I had to hold his back and pat it, and still he kept joking. I gave a small gasp and looked away. Phil stepped up in front of me, lifted my chin, and looked at me hard. His eyes moved from one of mine to the other. I pulled away. "What?" He stopped, and I saw him try to relax his stance. It took a minute, and he didn't fully succeed. "I'm glad Marcus is okay," he stated, although his voice was still edgy. "You should be." Okay, if I kept this up, I might just kick my own butt. What was wrong with me? He sighed. "I'm sorry. I bit my lower lip, waiting. Say it. Please, just say it." "It's a good thing you were here to help him," he finally finished, his face still pinched. My eyes widened, and then I glared at him. Was he serious? I stormed over and plopped on the rug, crossing my arms roughly and shooting my venom into the flames. He was still standing. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. The room was quiet, and I couldn't believe I was doing this. Then again, his reaction had ticked me off. Finally he moved, coming over and kneeling next to me. My anger ebbed, but I kept my eyes straight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" I whispered back. "For whatever I did or didn't do right just a minute ago." My hackles shot up, and I was about to snap at him, but he sat down facing me, his back to the fire. I may be a click alpha and used to leading, but I will admit I'm completely lost right now. I went to open my mouth and then shut it. My body relaxed and I sighed, unfolding my arms. "It's my fault." "Okay, but could you clue me in on what that fault is?" When I looked at him, he smiled and shrugged. I had to smile too. Yeah, I was no good at this game, but I still couldn't flat out ask him. For some reason, if I did, well, I wouldn't know if he would just say what I wanted to hear, give me some lame excuse, or worse, tell me he didn't want me. It was fear of that last one that held my tongue. I guess I'm just a little stir-crazy," I finally stated. His body relaxed then, and he nodded. "Yeah, you're the only one that hasn't been out of these walls since we got here." I shrugged, and he leaned forward, smiling. "Tonight, let's do something about that." That did get my attention, and my eyes widened. He nodded. "You need to stretch your legs, and I'll talk with Ryan and Will. I'm sure we can find some place to—" Okay, he was losing points fast. I turned and looked back into the fire, seeing him reach up and run a hand through his hair. Good. Let him chew on that for a few minutes. Gads, talking about it like I was a dog that needed to be walked after he talked to the master. Really? Sounds from outside came to his rescue. We heard car engines, then Rock's voice. The guys were back from town. Phil leaned over and down, looking up at me. "Maybe they have something that will cheer you up a bit." My lip twitched and he frowned. He didn't realize he was making things worse for himself. I stood and stormed out of the room into the other one. "Yeah, maybe a nice chew toy or a little treat," I mumbled, low enough that he couldn't hear me. He followed me out. "Reina, what did I do?" I will admit, a small part of me enjoyed the look on his face at that moment. He was confused, worried, and completely clueless. Good. Fair was fair. Rock was laughing outside, and I did feel a pang of jealousy for their freedom. When I stepped towards the door, Phil intercepted. "Yeah, I know," I snapped, and then stormed into the other room, slamming the door behind me. Obviously, the women that lived here never needed to slam a door for theatrical reasons, because it didn't crash closed. It just kind of shut. There was a whoosh of air at first. "We are strong," but then it slowed and just clicked into place. That really ticked me off, and I started to pace. My fists were tight, and I growled and mumbled under my breath as I stomped from one end of the room to the other and then back. Phil hadn't tried to follow me. I was torn about that. Part of me was glad, the other part was hurt. Why people thought it was easier being a female was beyond me. I didn't even understand myself at the moment. There was banging on the front door. Rock and Jackson's laughter carried through the walls. I heard Phil open it, but then it closed and the voices stayed outside. The laughing stopped, and I glared at the door. Great. Now he was telling everyone. When the front door opened again, I stopped, glaring at the one that stood between me and whoever was brave enough to come in. There was a knock on this door, and then it opened. I huffed. What if I'd been changing or something? Track walked in with several bags in his arms and his nose peeking over the top of them. I watched him as he moved over to Phil's bed and opened his arms, letting them fall to the bed and bounce a few times, tipping over. He let out his breath and then turned. You owe me big time for this. I stood in the middle of the room looking at him like he had gone mad. I was sure Phil would have told him about my fit before he came in. He plopped down on my bed and shook his head. Do you have any idea just how humiliating that was? Then there was trying to keep Rock and Jackson's nose out of the bags. He smiled then, but they didn't see. I highly doubted that keeping my secret was the reason for his victorious grin, but I stood there silently. He laid back on the bed, chuckling. Rock's eye might be a different color and size next time you see him, but your secrets are safe. When I still didn't reply, he sat up. So, since I'm your best friend and stand-in girlfriend in all of this, do I at least get to see you in... That got my feet moving. He was fast, and I saw it coming. When I pounced, he twisted and jumped. I pushed back off the bed and crouched, his eyes tight and hackles up. Come on now, Ray, that's what girlfriends do, right? Or am I supposed to brush and braid your hair first? He was taunting me, and I fell for it. I lunged again, and since he was the one with the clear head, he moved out of the way easily. I landed on the bed with a thud, shook my head, and jumped back up. Yeah, I want to see you in that nightgown, he winked, and I pulled back my lips and growled, the anger rushing into my ears as my heart pounded hard. I even picked up a few extras. He stole a quick glance at the fire. You're going to want to make sure that is kicked up warm, though. There isn't much to them. This time, I did make contact. Like a football player, I lunged, grabbed him around the waist, and down we both went. I felt a pain in the back of my head, but I didn't care. I was beyond ticked now. My fist flew, and I heard him grunt, but he had twisted, and it didn't land as hard as I had wanted it to. One is pink, he continued, panting and grunting, as he turned and twisted to keep from getting the full force. One is black, but the sales lady said that the snaps were only for... Another swing landed, this time in his ribs. He yelped a bit and then grabbed me, and before I knew it, I was pinned. He was panting hard, sitting on me, leaning over. We were almost nose to nose, and I growled. Tisk, tisk. Is that any way to treat your BFF? He chuckled, a little out of breath. I cried out as I arched my back and tried to buck him off, but he knew that maneuver and lifted up just enough. When I twisted, he pulled. When I pulled, he pushed. I kicked my feet, which did no good at all since there was nothing back there to make contact with. Finally, I laid still, glaring up at him. He leaned closer and then pulled back just as I brought my head up fast. I missed. But my rage was wearing out, and I started to pant as the adrenaline neutralized. Suddenly, there was a dull throbbing at the back of my head, but I stayed still, looking up at him. Better now? He smiled. I gave a hard nod, and he sat up, letting go of one of my arms. Bad mistake. I swung, and he tried to catch it too late. I hit him square in the chest, and he went over backwards. I wasn't mad anymore, just out to get even. I smiled as I jumped up, and he laughed as he flung himself forward into a crouch. "So, what has your panties in a bunch?" he asked, as we slowly circled each other. "Oh, wait, you haven't tried on the thongs I got you yet," he grunted as he twisted out of the way, both of us turning quickly to face each other. Finally I stood, took in a deep breath, and huffed. "If you really bought that stuff, I hope you kept the receipts, because you're taking it back." "Not in this lifetime," he chuckled, still watching me as I flung my hair out of my face and moved towards the bags. I was ticked at first, but there were these two sales ladies that ended up making the event quite eventful, he smiled. I shot him a hard look, and he shrugged, standing up straight. That's what I was waiting for. I turned and jumped, this time hitting him in the chest. But he grabbed me and we went down again, struggling for a top place. I lost. This time, my head hit the corner of the chest, and this time I felt the pain right away. I cried out, putting up my hand to the back of my hair. "Ha! Nice try, not falling for—" His voice trailed off as the smell of blood made it to him. He cussed under his breath and jumped off me, pulling me up into a sitting position. I moaned a little as the first throb decided to join this one. "Ryan's gonna kill me," he hissed, moving behind me. "And Phil's gonna kill whatever's left." He moved my hand away and let out another string of words his mother wouldn't approve of. "I came in here to help you vent," he hissed, moving my hair to see the wound. "Instead, you tried to kill me," I chuckled. "Head wounds bleed a lot," he growled, then reached over and tried to grab one of the bags. Another few words his mother wouldn't be happy about, and finally he yanked his t-shirt off and balled it up. "Here, hold this on it until I get the first aid bag." "Now I get it," I teased, pressing the shirt against the back of my head. "My side finally heals, and you miss playing doctor, so you crack my skull." He chuckled. "Yeah, that's it. But now it's mine I'm worried about." Just then the door opened and we both turned. Me sitting on the floor with a shirt wadded up at the back of my head, my own blood dripping down my arm, and Track standing shirtless over a bag. Yeah, this looked about right. Ryan let out a growl and Phil rushed over to kneel next to me. "We were just wrestling," I stated as he moved the shirt and joined Track in the saying things your mother would put soap in your mouth for saying club. Ryan stepped over Track and I saw my friend flinch when our alpha snatched the bag. He knelt next to me as Phil grabbed an oil lamp and brought it over. "It was my fault," I stated quickly. "I was having a little fit and he was just trying to help." "By beating you senseless?" Ryan snapped. "It usually works," I chuckled, and then sighed. "Really, it was my fault. He tried to talk to me and I just snapped." Ryan's face relaxed a bit and Phil turned. "Get some boiled water. We have to clean this up." Track rushed out of the room and I twisted my body. It wasn't his fault. Please don't take it out on him. Phil looked at me, glanced at the bags and mangled pile of things on his bed, then took the gauze that Ryan handed him. I grunted and turned around, snatching the shirt and putting it back to my head. I was sure it wasn't life-threatening, and head wounds did bleed a lot, even scratches. Look, Track didn't do anything wrong. I was in a foul mood and he was just the first one through that door. A smile crossed Ryan's face then. "Brave one," he chuckled. I smiled and nodded. "We're very stupid." Phil still wasn't smiling, but our alpha was, and that counted. This is how he always gets me out of a bad mood, I explained, again letting them do whatever they were doing back there. Well, one of the ways, and it does usually work, I crinkled my nose. But this room is so small and crowded. I hope you didn't break their furniture, Phil stated. We are guests here. My eyes widened and I turned, then smacked his arm when I saw his grin. Track came back in with a small bucket of steaming water. Going to cook me now? I teased. He rolled his eyes and sat it down, then handed Ryan some more rags. They cleaned the wound, which was the most important part. Wolves heal fast. A dirty wound could get ugly. Finally, Ryan picked up the oil lamp and inspected it. It's clotted already. He sat down and shook his head. And I thought it was Jackson and Rock I needed to worry about busting up the place. Hey! Rock hollered from the other room. Track was scrubbing the blood off the wood floor, and Phil took another rag and started wiping it off my arm. He was gentle, and his touch felt good. Ryan cleared his throat, and I realized I was staring at Phil hard. I sat back and let him finish. Is the patient dressed? Jackson asked, opening the door a little. Yep, dang, we missed it, he stated, opening the door more and coming in. Rock and Marcus right behind him. Ryan and Track finished cleaning up, and Phil helped me stand. I was just a little dizzy, but not too bad. Dang, Track, when we said beat her over the head, it was just a figure of speech, Rock chuckled. I rolled my eyes and then saw them look towards the other bed. I yelped and rushed over, cramming the things that had fallen out back into the bags. I pushed them down hard and turned, yelping again when Rock and Jackson were standing over me. I leaned back as if I were protecting cubs and not shopping bags. What's in those? Rock asked. Jackson nodded, arching his neck to see over me. Track nearly put a few holes in our heads when we asked. He reached his hand out and I smacked it away. Rock tried to lunge on the other side and I brought my foot up, kicking him in the thigh. Enough, pups, Ryan chuckled, and the two guys stopped, but their eyes kept trying to see over me. Yeah, enough, pups, I huffed back, blowing the hair out of my face. Panic was still rushing through me. I was laying back on the sacks now, my heart racing. If they saw what was in them, I gave a small shiver. She's fine, just a bump and some blood loss, Ryan smiled. Now you two go unload the rest of the car. Rock made one more pretend attempt to grab a bag, but Jackson shoved him. I was quickly forgotten as they smacked and shoved each other as they left the room, throwing out insults about who would win in a real fight. I gave a loud sigh of relief and sat up, pushing the rest of my hair out of my face. Track stepped up and frowned. Sorry about that, he stated, looking at the top of my head. No, I needed it. Thanks, I smiled. He winked and then took the bucket, bloody t-shirt, and rags and left. Marcus went quickly. Now I felt like a kid in trouble as the two alphas stood looking at me. I lowered my head and felt that invisible tail tuck under me. Then I saw Ryan's feet turn and I looked up as he walked out of the room. Okay, that's not what I expected. I turned back to Phil and knew he had been left with the task of reprimanding me. Great. At least I wasn't spitting mad at him just now, or that wouldn't have been such a smart move on his part. I know it got out of hand. I'm sorry, I put in quickly. Better to get this part over with. Phil nodded. Yes, it did. Like Ryan said, we thought it was Jackson and Rock we had to worry about when it came to roughhousing. He smiled. but I should have known better. You two were always trying to beat each other senseless. Was this that trick that parents played on you, making you think you weren't in trouble so you'd let your guard down? I frowned, watching him cautiously. He moved a step closer and I stiffened. Wolves didn't ground you to your room or give you a timeout. We were a physical bunch, and getting in trouble for pummeling each other oftentimes meant getting pummeled yourself with some lectures thrown in for good measure. The door opened again and Ryan walked in with something in his hand. He crunched it and then shook it. Ice pack. It'll help the swelling, he stated, holding it out to me. I took it quickly, mumbled a thank you, and then he left. It works better if you put it on the lump on your head, Phil stated. Oh, I mumbled, and did just that. He sighed then, and I relaxed. Good. Here it was. The whole staring and not saying anything was a bit unnerving. So, do I want to know what's in those bags? I moaned. Probably? He chuckled. Would you tell me if I asked? No. He stepped closer and I leaned back, looking more like a mother hen trying to defend her eggs from the big bag wolf. That image tickled me and I chuckled. Then he knelt in front of me, looking up. Reina, you have to be more careful. I nodded. No point getting uppity just now. Besides, the dull throb in the back of my head kind of took the fight out of me. That and the good hard wrestling match. That always helped me work out my frustrations, which is why Track had goaded me into it. He knew me so well. He smiled then, lifting his eyes up and behind me a bit. I have to admit, I am extremely curious about those bags. My eyes widened again and he shrugged. What could be in there that's so secretive? Just girl stuff? Why I said it like a question, I have no idea. His eyes sparkled and he nodded. Fair enough. But if I ever walk in, set down a handful of bags, and tell you not to peek, you remember this. Then he pointed at me for good measure. He stood up. Now, about that shower. I gasped, but he held out his hand. I told you, there's no way I'm putting you through that. He shrugged. They couldn't get the generator and heater that I had hoped for. Ryan put his foot down there, but, well, they got a tub. A tub? He chuckled. Well, heat up pails of water to fill it, and then you can have a warm bath. I smiled. I know I probably should have refused, saying how it was too much work for them, but I couldn't help being a bit selfish. It's not a nice hot shower, but it's almost as good. I stood and nodded. Thank you. I mean, I could take a shower like everyone else, if I had to. Yes, I know you're not a soft paw, he chuckled. Well, maybe when it comes to the thought of standing under freezing cold water on purpose. He shivered playfully. Trust me, you have no idea, and I intend to keep it that way. He looked around the room. I'll set it up in here. Then he looked back at his bed. Oh, sorry, that's where Track dumped them. Actually, I was just thinking you might want to hide your secrets. I'm gonna need the guys to help me with this. I jumped up fast, started grabbing the bags, and finally shoved them under my own bed. There wasn't a closet, and that was the best I could do on short notice. But I sat on the bed, keeping guard while they brought it in. It was actually a real bathtub, and I laughed, thinking about how they had managed to get that here in the SUV. When they told me it was tied to the roof, I laughed even harder. Yeah. Good thing I'm not trying to get any dates around here, Rock said, pretending to be grumpy as they dumped a few buckets of steaming water into it. Excuse me? Jackson ribbed. You were all over that one girl at the grocery store. I thought she was going to call security on you. The buckets kept coming in, and I wondered where they were heating them up, but my eyes kept moving back to that tub, imagining crawling into warm water. I smiled and hugged my knees to my chest. Track dumped his bucket in and then walked over, leaning into my ear. There's some girly bath stuff in one of those bags, he stated. This time I didn't swing, and he winked as he walked off. Phil stayed in the room with me and finally sat next to me. It's not a shower, he said again, but my smile told him how much I appreciated it. The pack here, he stated as Marcus and Jackson poured theirs in. They're still going a bit crazy to meet you. Oh, I gasped. I had almost forgotten that there were others here, and I said that. He turned and looked at me, watching my face. I shrugged. I kind of just decided it was us. The guys and us and Ryan, I stammered. On vacation? I bit my lower lip. But you do remember that we're with the Owlsaw pack on their territory, he stated, looking too concerned. Of course I do, I replied, not sure whether that was the truth or not. Did I remember that, or did I only remember it when he said it? Dang holes, they seemed to spring up everywhere. Finally, the bath was full, or as full as it could get without fear of sloshing over and ruining the floors. Rock and Jackson bowed theatrically. Your tub awaits, my lady, Roxon said in an awful English accent. I bowed back and he shook his head. You are a princess. You're supposed to do that curtsy thing. Guys bow. Sheesh. Oh, begging your pardon, I cleared my throat, then took a hold of an invisible skirt, fanned it out, and gave a deep curtsy. He nodded, satisfied, and then Phil looked towards the door. Well, m'lady, that's my cue. He bowed again, and the room cleared. Phil lifted a stack of towels. Some to make sure the floor stays dry, and the others are for you. I stepped up, took them, then lifted up and kissed him on the cheek. Thank you, I whispered before I lowered myself back. He smiled, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Anything for you, Tay. Or are we calling you Princess now? I giggled, and he headed towards the door. I think I'll stand guard on the other side. I wouldn't put it past those two to think you needed help. My head tilted, and I shrugged. So what happens if I do need help? I walked over and sat the towels on the floor next to the tub. He didn't answer right away, and I swallowed my smile. When I stood back up, I was looking at him, waiting. I'll be right outside this door, he replied, looking a bit flushed. When I only nodded, he glanced around the room as if trying to figure out what to say, then finally left. I chuckled, and then remembered what Track had said. I knelt down, grunting as I yanked the bags out from under the bed, crawling part way under to get the things that had fallen out. I found the bag of bath stuff, looked it over, and then opened the bottle and sniffed it. It was nice. Wolves don't wear perfume. Our strong sense of smell is easily overpowered, but this had just the slightest hint of lavender and something else, something soft, almost powdery. Odd since it was liquid, but it was nice. I walked over and let 3 drops fall into the water. No need coming out drenched in scent. That would defeat the purpose. I peeled off my clothes, plopped the bag on top of the towels, and then moaned louder than I meant to when I stepped into the tub. The hot water seeped into my bones, and I gave a hard shiver as it warmed me. I smiled, leaned my head back on the edge, and sighed. This felt incredible. I had always loved my showers, but I'd decided then and there I was going to take more of these. Rock's voice carried through the door, but I ignored it, focusing on the crackling fire next to me and the heat working through me. My side was healed now, but I reached down and rubbed the spot. It was just a little tender and red, but that would go away soon enough. With my eyes closed, I drifted, enjoying the feeling. The water sloshed when I shifted positions, and I looked up to make sure I wasn't getting any on the floor. The small bag was still sitting on the tower of towels. I picked it up and sat up a little. I put the bath oil on the ground and pulled out a lavender scrunchie. There was also soap, but it was my bar of unscented soap. There was also a loofah stone that I luckily knew it was for the rougher parts, like my feet. Track definitely had help with that. Either that, or I didn't know my best friend as well as I thought. There were nail clippers, a file, even a small bottle of clear polish. I might use the first two, but the last one was staying in the bag, clear or not. Finally, I put the bag down, leaned back, and enjoyed the water some more. The fire kept the water warm longer than it would have, but I realized I had better get to business. I grunted as I pulled my leg up and got to work with the loofah. Next, I did my nails and quickly found out those brown file things were not meant to be used wet. I used the soap and then dunked myself and washed my hair as best I could. I tried not to think about the fact that it was not clean water at that point. It was better than a bucket. My unscented shampoo and conditioner were getting a bit low. I doubted a town around here carried it, unless they were run by non-humans. When I stood up, the water crashed loudly, but didn't spill over. I picked up a towel, wrapped it around my hair, then another around me. Another one I tossed onto the floor, and then I stepped out, already missing that bath. I knew I should probably get dressed, but instead I walked over to the fire, letting it lick the water off my legs and arms. I let the towel drop and stepped closer, my skin prickling until the heat warmed it. Sitting on the rug, I towel-dried my hair as best I could, then got my brush and used it until my hair was only damp. With nothing else to do, I stepped up towards the bags that were now dumped all over my own bed. I gasped when the heat from the fire left, grabbed a towel, and wrapped it around me. The first bag had jeans. One pair even had a soft inner lining like fleece. That would be perfect on a cold night outside. There was a pair of long thermal underwear, and I started to wonder just how cold it got out there. One pair was deep blue. Then I let out a growl as I pulled out a soft pink set. My eyes shot towards the door, but then I smiled. He had went through a lot to get me this stuff. I couldn't begrudge him that one dig, but I tossed it aside. The next bag had a few shoe boxes in it. I opened one and found a very nice pair of boots. They were short boots, but had furry stuff poking out of the top. I slipped my hand inside and smiled as the fur went all the way through. I moaned softly, and then sat the dark brown boots on the floor. A pair of dark sneakers, a pair of rain boots, dark blue. I nodded. Perfect and useful, even if they weren't on my list. I reached over and pulled another bag to me. This one had sweaters. Nice, darker colors, but also pretty in a way. So far, no thongs or snaps. I grinned. Then I groaned. I pulled out a handful of underwear. That was definitely not meant to keep me warm. They were also skimpy. "How many are there?" I whispered, as I continued to pull more out. "Red, deep pink, blue with lace, red with black lace." I moaned again. Then my hand caught something and I lifted up a bra. My face tightened and I yanked the bottom of the bag, spilling its contents onto the quilt. There were bras to match almost every pair of panties. I bit my lower lip and closed my eyes. Track had some explaining to do, if I could muster the courage to even bring it up. I sat looking at the mound of feminine underwear and sighed. I did ask for underwear, and did ask for pretty, but really? Finally, I reached over them and pulled the last bag to me. When I dumped that one out, I found a smaller bag. I ignored the piles of other things and looked inside. Okay, this was on my list. There was a small thing of blush with a large brush, a tube of mascara, and some round thing with lip gloss, a very soft shade of pink. Finally, he got something right off the list. Not too much, not too bright, but even I knew how to use these. I giggled quietly and then pulled out another tube, tilting my head. I read the direction and then shrugged, squirting some into one palm. I followed the directions, rubbing it over my hands and between my fingers like washing them. It was gritty, but didn't hurt. When I had all the parts of my hands covered, I walked to the tub and rinsed it off. "Wow," I whispered, feeling how soft my skin was. Okay, I might like that one too. There were a few pairs of warm, fuzzy pajama bottoms in the last bag, nice and yet practical, and there were matching t-shirts. Solid colors, and the closest to crazy was red. Not too bad. Then I saw a few things wrapped in tissue and my heart skipped. Oh, what had he done? I carefully pulled one onto my lap and slowly opened it. I moaned, and then growled at the door across the room. When I lifted the shiny material, the nightgown opened, and I moaned again. It was something that women wore in the movies. It was long, would come to the floor, low cut, tight fitting, and soft blue in cover. The only saving grace was, it was not see-through. I went to bunch it up, but stopped. Finally, I folded it carefully back into the tissue and nervously grabbed the next one. This one was shorter, but would come to my knees. It wasn't shiny, but soft and actually nice. It was a bit more feminine than a nightshirt, but still presentable. The last one almost made me forget about the others. There was almost nothing to it, and it took me several tries to even figure out which end was up. I rolled my eyes and did cram that one back into the bag. So, I sat there in a pile of practical and not so practical clothes. My earlier plan was withering as my nerves slipped. I bit my lower lip and tried to find the courage I was so full of before I actually had the things to pull it off. I yelped when someone knocked on the bedroom door, then panicked and started to cram the clothes into the bag, ripping one completely. "Reina?" came Phil's voice. "Don't come in. I'm naked," I shot out, and then slapped a hand over my mouth. Didn't mean to say that. There was some chuckling on the other side, but not from Phil. I sighed and then cleared my throat. "I'll be out in a minute." "Come out now," Rock called, and then grunted, followed by several thuds. I smiled and stood, turning back to the pile of clothes. It doesn't matter what you put on the outside, but having something nice underneath makes all the difference, I thought. Not sure where I had heard that before, but it made sense. Finally, I settled on the pink and black underwear set, deciding it was easier to be brave where no one else could see. Then I slipped into a pair of jeans and pulled on a nice but warm blue sweater. It was scoop neck, but not too low, and the sleeves fell over the back of my hand. It was soft, too, and I rubbed my arm. Not cashmere, but nice. Next, I crammed all the underwear and nightgowns into one of my duffel bags and shoved it way under the bed. I grabbed handfuls of other clothes and crammed them into my other bag. Then I grunted as I tried to zip it. Another knock, and I gasped, yanking the zipper hard. The jeans and shirts were folded and nicely set on the chest. The dresser belonged to someone else, and I didn't feel right even opening them to see if they were empty. The makeup was shoved into a bag. I just wasn't ready for that yet. Looking around the room, I nodded, then picked up the towels and set them on the chair. Lastly, I took my brush and ran it through my hair some more, leaning near the fire to try to dry it a bit more. When there was nothing left to do, I straightened my shirt, squared my shoulders, and headed to the door. My heartbeat quickened as I looked down at myself. They can't see it, I reassured myself and turned the handle. It squeaked a little as it opened, and all the heads in the room turned as I stepped out. For some reason, I felt like I was stepping out in a full ball gown instead of jeans, sweaters, and boots. Again, I was glad I couldn't blush, but I quickly looked down, feeling all of their stares. What? I couldn't look any different, and I was positive they couldn't see the underwear. At least I was pretty sure. I bit my lower lip and suddenly wanted to run back into the room. Rock was the first one to me. You smell... He grunted again, and I looked up to see Track standing next to him, one hand in a fist. Rock rubbed his arm. What? I was going to say she smells good. Dang. I lowered my eyes. Great. I knew the bath oil would be too much. I went to turn back into the room, but Track reached out and took my arm. He smiled at me and my eyes dropped again. Wow, this was a lot harder than I thought. Go empty the tub, Ryan stated in a rough voice, and Rock, Jackson, and Marcus moved past me. Ryan and Phil were standing in front of the couch now, and the other alpha was there as well. Now I really wanted to run back in. I hadn't expected to see him there. My heartbeat picked up, and Track leaned into my ear. Relax, pup. He just came to say hello. I nodded, but didn't reply. Suddenly, having on the lacy underwear made me feel vulnerable, as if they might just be able to tell somehow. Stupid, I know, but it's how I felt. Phil moved up to me and smiled. Nice clothes. My eyes widened, and I looked at Track, my eyes asking my question. He chuckled and then turned. Yeah, I thought she could use some warmer stuff. When I turned back, I felt Phil's eyes move over me. The jeans were fitted, but not too tight. The sweater also seemed to cling to me where it hadn't a moment ago. The boots felt like they had ruffles now, and I wanted to hide. But he reached out and took my hand, stopping and looking down at it when he did. I moaned, but he smiled, rubbing his thumb over the back of my hand. That's where I'm going to stop.